All right. Thanks, Sal. Let me get this up. Got it. Okay. So, thanks everyone for coming. I am much more accustomed to speaking in front of groups of people, so bear with me as I get over feeling awkward talking to myself to the screen. As Sal said, this is my day job. I'm a horse vet, and I do a lot of mare foal work, and the foals like to hit the ground in the spring. So birding vacations during spring migration are not an option for me ever until I retire. So I do try to plan my vacations around fall migration. Why Spain? It kind of fell in our laps. I happen to be on an email list for Naturalist Journeys, and they sent an email out saying 2 weeks of fall migration in Spain. And I thought, well, that would be interesting someday. And I forwarded the email to my husband, and he said, why someday? Let's do it now. So it was a little bit spur of the moment, and did not have my usual OCD preparations for the vacations we usually take. Because we went with a tour group and they organized everything for us. So, just start with a little geography. What is the Iberian Peninsula? It's just Spain and Portugal, basically. So forms this big peninsula that separates the North Atlantic Ocean from the Mediterranean Sea. And then you have the little tiny Strait of Gibraltar here separating Europe from Africa. We specifically spent all our time in Andalusia, the southern part of Spain. And for those who like maps, Andalusia, some familiar landmarks would be Seville or Granada. We flew into Malaga and then did a big loop through all of Andalusia. So we started here, we came up to the Andújar region, spent 3 nights up here, came all the way across Andalusia to the coast over here between Huelva and Cadiz. If Cadiz sounds familiar to anybody, the fun fact from this slide is Christopher Columbus set sail from 2 of his expeditions from Cadiz. From here, we came down to Tarifa, the very southernmost point, where we could look across the strait and see Africa. And from Tarifa, we came up to Ronda here and then back to Malaga. So a great big loop around Andalusia. This is a nice map I stole from the internet, showing the West European flyway here, and how all of these birds just come down here, funnel down, sort of stage themselves in Andalusia, and then cross the strait. Another map I stole from the internet, but this shows all the natural parks that we visited, so it was a great map to find. It is important, I think, to point out the 2 different shades of green. National parks in Spain are not open to the public. You have to get a special permit and get guided tours to go into one of those national parks. The natural parks are open to the public. So the first place we came, again, we flew into Malaga, then we came up to the natural park at Sierra de Andújar. Like that. And then my vet geek moment is when we pulled into our lodgings in this area. This veterinary ambulance was here, mainly because this is one of the last strongholds for the very endangered Iberian lynx. And where these lodgings are, they had trail cameras all around this place, where they could monitor the lynx population. If we look down the hill from where we were staying, there was this fenced area where they were breeding domestic rabbits to try to feed the lynxes, because their main food source is rabbit. And they were actually in the process of trying to capture 2 lynx cubs from this population to transfer them to the other very isolated population of lynx to get some genetic diversity between the populations. This is what the habitat looks like. So even though it's called Sierras, it's more like our foothills, and it's full of these oak trees and umbrella pines and just sort of these rolling hills through here. Lots of oaks, excuse me, but this particular oak will be interesting to any wine drinkers in the audience. This is a cork oak, and you can see where they harvested the bark here. They make wine corks out of this bark. This tree was not freshly harvested. It's actually starting to grow its bark back. It takes about 9 years to grow back, then they can harvest the tree again. Acorns, staple food source for a lot of the animals out here. Just like us, Spain is going through an epic drought right now. Not a lot of grass for animals to eat right now. This is another typical of the habitat here. The elevation, again, it's not very high, 1,290 meters, which is 4,200 feet roughly in elevation here. Very rocky, very almost oak savanna looking here. And driving on roads up here, you could almost look out here and say, I'm on 120 driving between Knights Ferry and Sonora. It looks very similar, except the wildlife's a little bit different. So we have red deer and mouflon out here instead of mule deer. Red-legged partridges and turkeys. There are some rivers going through here. This is one of the few rivers that still had some water in it. So we did get some riparian birds in these habitats. This is the same river, but up closer to the dam. Very lovely area. And just another view sort of looking out over these just rolling, what they are calling mountains, but what would be foothills to us, these big umbrella pines and oak trees everywhere. Also agriculture, lots of cattle pastures here, although the particular cattle in this area, not cows that you eat. These are bullfighting bulls that were out here. And we've got a little smattering of fallow deer trying to share what little grass is out here for to eat. Again, wildlife's a little different. So this striking fellow is a mouflon ram, similar to our bighorn sheep, but I dare say more beautiful. Love the black markings on these guys. Red deer were everywhere, and even though there's not much grass to eat, they're taking full advantage of the acorns. And this stag was incredibly photogenic, so I've included a lot of photos of him because he's beautiful. So again, kind of back in this rocky oak savanna-ish habitat. This is lynx habitat right here. We got to this area about 30 minutes before sunrise in the mornings because it's known to have a cat wandering around in here. We watched and waited and waited and watched, and the sun came up over our backs and started shining down on this ridge. And our guide finally said, I got the cat. And if you have eagle eyes, you can see this little cat right here, which I will blow up for you because he's hard to see. Lynx is very similar to the bobcats that we have here, or the Canadian lynx. You can see his little bobtail here with the black tip, these giant paws. A couple other pictures here. You can almost see his face here. Very cat-like behavior. He just parked himself in the sun here and snoozed for about 30 minutes while we watched him sleep. Occasionally would sit up, take a bath, watch his face, and then go back to sleep. He didn't really do anything more active for us, and we eventually had to go on with our day, but I was quite excited. I didn't want to get too excited before the trip, going, oh my gosh, I hope we see the lynx. I didn't want to be disappointed if we didn't see it, but it was fantastic to see this cat. Now from the same location, at any given time of any day, if you look up, this is what you see, just raptors just coming over the hills above you and soaring south by the hundreds, really, lots of raptors. Some of them are familiar to you guys, like the golden eagle. This is the same species of eagle that we have over here. Not any less impressive though. The black or Cinereus vulture is definitely not like the black vultures in the States. This guy, not only different in color and shape, but is immensely bigger than our black vultures. So for comparison, the American black vulture wingspan is about 145 centimeters. This guy's wingspan is between 250 and 285 centimeters, which translates to about 8 to 9 feet. So for comparison, California condor average is 274 centimeters. So this bird could be potentially bigger than our condors. My favorite bird of the trip, griffon vulture, which I'll explain more later, but they're just spectacular birds. Same size as the last vulture, about a 9-foot wingspan. You can see the two of them together here. So upper right is a griffon vulture, lower left is a black vulture. And this is one of the main target birds here. Spanish imperial eagle is an endemic to this region of Spain. I wish it were a better photo, but this is not a light artifact. This white leading edge of the wing is the main identifying mark for an adult Spanish imperial eagle in flight. And if we look down again, we've got little owls. Lots of jokes on the trip of what was the name of that little owl again? Oh yeah, little owl. Very similar to our burrowing owls. Find them out during the day and close to the ground. So all the ones we saw were perched on rocks when we found them, and then they would flush and kind of fly up to a low snag. Very cute little guys. It's another bird I wish I had a better photo of. I have now seen hoopoes in probably 5 different countries, and I've yet to get a decent photo of this bird, which is very sad for me because they're the coolest little things with this long bill, this crest. When they get excited, they lift this crest and beautiful black and white wings. So my quest for a decent hoopoe photo indoors. Along the rivers, we saw several of these little kingfishers, common kingfisher. They're smaller than our belted kingfishers and incredibly fast. It's almost like watching a hummingbird fly up and down the river. They would just zoom back and forth, chasing each other, playing tag, and then they would dive into the vegetation and you couldn't see where they perched. It's just this little glittering ball of blue feathers that was hustling up and down the river. So right as the sun was setting, this guy finally perched somewhere where I could see him and get a photo. So I was really happy about that. The same location on the river, I don't have a good photo because it was getting too dark, but we had European river otters in this river. I include this list of birds not because I'm going to read through it all or expect you guys to read it all, but just to give you guys an idea of the species of birds that we saw in this particular habitat. You can see that it is mostly like large groups of raptors seen here, and then birds that you'd expect to find. Whoop, sorry guys, birds you'd expect to find in our oak savanna area, like woodpeckers, kestrels, orioles, shrikes. Instead of sparrows, they have tits everywhere in Europe. Warblers, nuthatches, and all those type. And then we'll just point out some of the endemics. Again, Spanish imperial eagle, Iberian green woodpecker, so a lovely woodpecker that we saw multiple times. Iberian gray trike and Iberian magpies, another really beautiful bird. So the Eurasian magpie is similar to our black-billed magpie, just black and white bird, but these Iberian magpies, these beautiful blue, gray colors, just lovely. So after 3 nights in Andújar, we moved all the way across the country towards the coast to La Doñana. I included this picture because I feel like it's an epic fail on my part as a horse vet to be in Andalusia and be surrounded by Andalusian horses, and I took 0 photos of horses here. So all my horse peeps are going to be very sad. The only picture I have is the south end of this horse that I took because the cattle egret was sitting on its back. So here we are over here on the coast. So even though this is dark green, saying national park, we were not allowed in the center of this, but there is a border that doesn't show up here. They had national park border around the edge of this whole park that we could explore. Being coastal, we were looking for wetland species here. So we had freshwater ponds, coastal areas, salt pans, which is an interesting place. So these are huge saltwater lagoons. They channel water in from the Atlantic Ocean, which makes great wading areas for lots of shorebirds and large waders, into these increasingly more and more shallow ponds where they let the water evaporate down to where it's just salt. So even though this looks like a white sand beach, this is all salt here. Which they would then tractor and bulldoze up into these huge mountains of salt. So it's an interesting process to watch. We had some savanna areas here as well. And again, a forest full of umbrella pines and cork oaks. Again, because we're on a reserve, they did not harvest the bark on the cork oaks. So this is a nice old cork oak. They're just beautiful trees. It looks like we're in a medieval forest here with these oaks and ferns and tall umbrella pines. It was a lovely place to be. And then what do people do in wetlands? They drain them and do agriculture. So worldwide, same story. Luckily for the birds in this area, the crop they picked was rice paddies. And so even though they drained the wetlands to make these, they still had permanent water sources. And so historically, this has actually been one of the largest heronry areas in the entire Mediterranean region. Unfortunately, because of the epic drought they're experiencing, this was the only rice paddy we saw on this trip, and the rest of the fields looked more like this, which is completely dry and overgrazed cattle and horse pastures. Obviously, there's still birds here, as this flock of storks testifies to. Additional problems here is, even though we're on a reserve, there's illegal farming happening all over this area. So people are sinking illegal wells and then growing crops like berries and things that aren't native agriculture things to this region. And you may ask, why is this allowed to happen on a natural reserve? Mainly because it provides jobs and politicians want to keep getting reelected. So nobody does anything about the illegal farming that's happening here. Include this picture of this flycatcher, one, because he's incredibly cute, or she actually, and two, because these flycatchers, as we traveled further south in Spain, we were getting almost a real-time view of migration, because we'd see these birds further north, we'd go south ahead of the birds. First day there, we'd see maybe one flycatcher. The next day, we'd see 10. By the third day, we'd be seeing 25 or 30 flycatchers, and then we'd move further south, and the whole process would start again. The flycatchers would follow us down. So it was just kind of fun to watch them migrate with us as we traveled. Everywhere we went, we saw these giant stick nests that look very similar to osprey nests, except possibly even bigger. Turns out they were all white stork nests. And there's a huge breeding colony here, which is why all those storks are still on that pasture in the previous photo. This particular breeding colony right here, all of these nests are about 3 meters off the ground. And these birds have been nesting here for generations and are so acclimated to human presence that there's big parking lot and walkways here where people can just walk up and look into these nests, and the birds don't seem to care, apparently. They had all fledged by the time we got here, so all we saw were the empty nests at this point, but they were so low to the ground, it was just astonishing that the birds would tolerate that, but apparently they do. Back to the salt pans, I would say the greater flamingo was probably the biggest surprise bird for me in Spain. In all of my flipping through the guidebooks and researching what I would see when I came here, flamingos weren't really on my list, and we saw flamingos by the thousands. Pretty much any puddle that had salt water in it had a flamingo in it, and they were just quite impressive. So here's a view out over the salt pans, and the flamingos were in this quite close up, nice pond, so we got really good views of these particular birds. The tall ones are the males, and the females are a bit shorter. So here's some boys showing off for the girls here. More white storks flying over these salt pans. This beautiful bird is woodchat shrike, similar to shrikes anywhere, but kind of used to them just sort of being gray and black. So to have all these colors on here, he was quite lovely. Found him. I would say borders are good spots for birding. So we're right on the edge of an umbrella pine forest, and there's a little clearing area, and he staked out his little territory right here. So we also have a few freshwater ponds here. So we get our freshwater waders as well. So along with the common snipe and wood sandpiper that are in this photo, we had green sandpipers, common sandpipers, black-winged stilts, pied avocets, coots, gallinules, purple swamp hens, pretty much any wader you can think of we could see in these ponds. And then some surprises. There are 3 species of little African weavers that have decided to make southern Spain their home. And so they are established breeding colonies and countable birds here. We can actually see their little weaver nests off in the distance. This little guy was putting on quite a show for us. and looks not only looks like a giant bumblebee, but he sounded like one when he would fly by. His wings were so loud, this vibrating, buzzing noise when he would fly by. So we called him the bumblebee bird. And driving through the agriculture fields, we encountered a small flock of glossy ibis here. Pretty much darkened the skies when they flew over us. And then I'll say kind of again and again sort of how familiar some things were in Spain compared to California. So we found, so this area of lagoons here, there's about 3 or 4 large lagoons. These were outside the natural park area of Doñana, mainly because Doñana is so dry right now, there was no water left there. So our guide knew where there were some areas that still had water, we were able to go. And so we have this gray heron here. It's very reminiscent of our great blue great egret, which is pretty much exactly the same as our great egret. But then the flamingos remind you that you're not at home. Excuse me, can we get some water? So because there's not a lot of water in the area, these ponds were very concentrated with birds. We got tons of waders and ducks at these ponds. And then this was the first of 2, what we called tornadoes of storks, which sounds funny, but these huge flocks of storks would come and sort of stage in this area. And then they would lift off and just circle around and around, get higher and higher and higher. So I thought I'd let you guys experience what it's like to be in a storknado here. As they just circled around and around, eventually just got higher and higher till pretty much everything you see here, even these tiny, let me get my cursor again, these tiny little specks in the distance here are just storks as high as you can see here. It was pretty amazing. We saw this happen on 2 separate occasions. Ubiquitous cattle egret. Every country I've been in, I've found cattle egrets. Does not make me love them any less. I still think they're a beautiful little bird. And then these were birds I had hoped I would get, but really didn't think I would get. So our guide, there's a reason that I only have close-up views of these ponds. These ponds were in a very, very strange little area that we never would have found without a guide. And he affectionately termed them, if you'll pardon the expression, the shitty ponds, because they're these in the center of this little village, littered with trash. They smelled bad. There's traffic going by. We're taking our life into our hands, just being on the side of the road, trying to look into these ponds. But we found the rarest ducks in these tiny little trashy ponds. So marbled teal or marbled duck, according to my field guide, there's only about 100 pairs left in Spain in just little local regional places. We happened to find about 8 of them in this pond, which was great. I don't know if you guys can see over on the right-hand screen, there's a pair of mallards. You can get an idea of how much smaller, excuse me, these little teal are compared to the mallards. And then the other bird in this photo, which again is not a great photo, is the white-headed duck, which is also very rare and very local to find in Spain. I wish I had a better picture of him, but every time I try, he would dive. They look very similar to our ruddy ducks, including the little tail sticking up. This is a juvenile, so he doesn't have the full white cheeks, but I felt pretty fortunate to have seen these 2 ducks. And then back at the a different set of salt pans, we found all these little sandpipers and peeps. Some of them similar to what's here. There were sanderlings, dunlin. Some of them, a lot of the dunlins still had their nice big black bellies here. Excuse me, losing my voice. But then birds I'd never seen before, like curlew sandpipers, a lot of red shanks, green shanks, godwits, things like that. I understand reading the listserv that we may have some of these guys in our area right now. But we saw lesser blackback gulls by the hundreds out here. Adding to the list, so this is all the new birds that we saw in the Doñana area. Again, I don't expect anyone to read this whole list, but just sort of get the overall impression that obviously this is birds associated with water in these areas, with a smattering of grassland and forest birds. Our next stop was way down at the southern point at the city of Tarifa. And Tarifa is notable historically as being the excuse me, only city that could withstand the invasion of the Moors. So the king at the time had this giant castle and fortress and managed to withstand the Moorish invasion here. For those who like maps, we're down here at the very southernmost point of continental Europe. There are actually parts of Africa that are further north than this part of Europe is. So obviously we're on the coast, so we have lots of coastal habitat here. Lots of hills though up above. Looking out here, this is the Strait of Gibraltar, and this mountain over here in the distance is actually Morocco. So you're looking at Africa right here with an 8-mile distance across the strait. And I'm actually at this point, we're sitting at a little cafe up on the hill, drinking a coffee and watching birds fly over our heads across the Strait of Gibraltar. So it's a great place for migration here. So just looking down the tower that you see in the center is actually goes back to the Moors. And as I say again and again, I mean, this could be a California coastline here. So it's very similar to our habitats. Look in the other direction. This is Tarifa, the city of Tarifa down here. This is a lighthouse, which used to be on an island. They actually built a little land bridge between the city and this island, so it's more of a peninsula now. The harbor to the city is right in here, past this little cement structure with a statue here. That is this structure right here. So I'm basically standing on that cement or that land bridge on that peninsula. And if you look left from here, you're looking across the strait and to the Mediterranean Sea. And if you look right from here, you're looking at the Atlantic Ocean. So it's kind of a cool spot to stand. Again, this is Africa, right across the way. Very windy area here. So wind turbines are all over southern Spain. So to continue the familiarity, we could have been driving along Altamont Pass anywhere here. Our local tour guide here, the company he works for actually does environmental studies and classes for employees of the wind farms to learn how to identify birds, spot birds that are migrating, and shut down the turbines when necessary. So I thought it was pretty cool that their company did that. Tourists also take advantage of the wind here. So looking down on the coast on this particular afternoon, tons of windsurfers and kite surfers. And the winds here, it's predictably windy all the time. The direction of the wind is going to dictate whether you have a good raptor migration day or a not so good raptor migration day. Ours was kind of medium, but on a good day with favorable winds, you could see many thousands of birds crossing the strait all at one time. This area, the city of Tarifa, is actually right down here. So we're a little bit north and west, heading up to the cliffs, and there's huge breeding colonies of griffon vultures up in these cliffs. Cross birds kind of down at the coastline. We saw lots of little passerines down here. Stone chats love having their picture taken, so this little guy perched here forever. Which is I was able to get a picture because I am not much of a photographer yet, so the birds have to sit really still for me to get them. But he was a lovely little guy. Here's his female counterpart, so a little female stone cat. I was super excited to finally see goldfinches. I've been to Europe a few times now. Always wanted to see this little bird. Never got to see one until now, and we saw massive flocks of them on this trip. So really a lovely little bird, and I was happy to finally get one. Coastal birds, again, they all feel a little bit familiar, but just not quite the same as ours. So Eurasian oyster catchers, similar to our oyster catchers, and then common ring plovers that look similar to our killdeer. And instead of European starlings, which is surprising since we were actually in Europe, we had spotless starlings everywhere, so a little bit different. And then again, if you look up at any place here, you'll find migrating raptors. I would say other than griffon vultures, booted eagles were probably the most common bird that we saw. And so in this view, we have three. So we have two adults with the white leading edge here, and then a juvenile bird down here. This is the one and only Egyptian vulture that we got to see, and it's a juvenile. The adults have a beautiful white plumage, but this wedge-shaped tail is what identifies him as an Egyptian vulture. Another view of a booted eagle, because just because they were common doesn't mean they weren't beautiful. Lots of pictures of them. And then not everything migrating is a raptor. So we saw several large flocks of bee eaters come by. You'd hear these guys coming first. They were quite loud, and you're like, oh, where are they? Trying to find them, and suddenly this huge flock would fly over your head. So then we come back to the griffon vulture. So we traveled up to this cliff area where they have their breeding colonies, and we saw griffon vultures by the hundreds here. So, and I'll tell you a little story about why this is my favorite bird. Way back in the early 1990s, before I went to vet school, I used to volunteer at the Oakland Zoo, and there was a pair of griffon vultures in the African veldt here. And their wings were pinioned and they couldn't fly, so they would just sort of strut around in their little enclosure, drape their wings behind them like a cape, and look like Count Dracula walking across the field there. And I just fell in love with these birds then and there. And I have since then always wanted to see them in the wild. I've tried in multiple places. We were in Greece a few years ago. They're supposed to be there. We couldn't find them. So to finally see them here was just like the penultimate. I was so happy to find these birds, and they're just so magnificent in real life. This is what their habitat looks like, and you can say, how does a bird with a 9-foot and on a cliff face? But you can see they're quite hard to see. This right here is a nest over here on the left with an almost fledged chick here. This chick was full of antics the whole time we were here. He was calling and being super dramatic, flopping his wings over the edge, trying to get the attention from the adults, and he was really entertaining to watch. There's an adult sitting up here, quite hard to see, but if I point him out, you find him. And then if you can see one coming in for a landing over here on the far right. They have very short tails and not much of a rudder. And so when they want to come in and land, you could actually sort of predict when one was going to land, because they would drop their legs and then hang them forward like they were deploying landing gear, and then just reach forward and sort of grab the cliff face when they wanted to land. And here's one in all his splendor, about the closest you could get, that full 9-foot wingspan. You can see how short that little tail is. But anyway, so there's my favorite bird of the trip. I just love these guys. In the same location, we actually did get a Ruppel's griffon, which is a much rarer, potentially subspecies or separate species of the griffon vulture. It was kind of hard for us novices to tell the difference, but our guide was like, oh my God, Ruppel. So we were super excited to have at least maybe gotten a glimpse of that. Every bird that you see in the slide is a griffon vulture that's been coming in and out of these cliffs here. So just massive numbers of them. Next morning, we came to another wetland area. Again, still it's kind of like ours, but not quite. So black-winged instead of black-necked. This whole wetland area used to be a landfill, and they did a massive cleanup on it and then channeled water back in to provide area for wading birds. If you've never seen flamingos in flight, it's really impressive to see these giant birds in flight, and the pink on their wings just really shows up when they're extended like that. And then sort of a typical whitewashed village up on the hillside here. Here I just saw a fair number of them. And then this bird, so there are cattle fields all around that ex-landfill area. We're checking all the cattle fields looking for this bird. Our guide says, look for a shiny black chicken with a bald head. And we looked and looked, couldn't find them. We went to a country club somewhat illegally, drove around the golf course trying to find them there because they're known to hang out there, couldn't find them. Headed down the road, our guide looks through the trees. He's like, oh, I think I see them. And we pull over in this sort of construction area where we probably weren't supposed to be either, but this is the one chance we got to find the northern bald ibis. They do nest here in a colony in the cliff faces as well, but they had already left their colony at this point and were ready to head out. So this is our one and only sighting of this fantastically weird and yet still beautiful bird. And no trip to the Strait of Gibraltar is complete without a whale watching trip. I just read in the news that the orcas there just sunk another yacht a few days ago. We did not see any orcas while we were here. Fortunately or unfortunately, I would personally would really like to see them. Apparently they don't go after motorized boats. They're only going after sailboats. So we would have been theoretically safe anyway. But we did encounter this huge pod of pilot whales, including some mothers with their little calves next to them. I probably took 50 plus photos of these guys. I'm going to limit it to 3 for this presentation, but they were pretty cool to see. Kind of mixed in, we had some bottlenose dolphins, and we had a baby here as well. And there's one taking a look at us. So as we spend more and more time in the country, I get fewer and fewer new birds to add to the list, but these were the new birds that we got in this area. Again, mostly water birds. We did get one shearwater out on our whale watching trip. And then more migrating raptors and some grassland birds. And then our last spot, we came from Tarifa back up into the mountains near the town of Ronda and then up into the Sierra de Grazalema. This is the city of Ronda. I highly recommend visiting this place if you ever visit Spain. This whole city is set up on these cliffs. The views are just astounding here. The city sort of sits in 2 parts on either side of this gorge. This gorge is 328 feet deep, I think. This bridge here is what they call the new bridge. Not if you're wondering, it was actually completed in 1793, I think. Still considered the new bridge because the old bridge was built in the 1600s. This is still a functional bridge, so we walked across this thing. And I can tell you, looking over the edge makes your toes tingle just a little bit. But as we're standing here, we could watch swifts and swallows sort of cavorting about in this gorge. Big flock of red-billed choughs came through as we were standing here. Ronda is actually well known for being kind of the birthplace of bullfighting. I'm not particularly a fan of bullfighting, but the history is real here. And then the fun fact, Ernest Hemingway was a huge fan of bullfighting and loved this place. So there are statues of Ernest Hemingway around. And Orson Welles is also a big fan, and his ashes are actually buried in Ronda. So putting in the area surrounding Ronda, this is another ancient cork oak that hasn't been harvested. Again, hopefully my internet's going to hang in here. Just a beautiful size. There's supposed to be a river here. It was dry at this point, but we did still get like a big flock of goldfinches, various types of red starts and Eurasian jays here. Again, we're kind of in the middle of a cattle pasture, not much grass, so I'm not sure what these girls were eating. But from down here, you could see that we could look up towards the mountains from here. So the following day, we headed up into the mountains. This is the village of Grazalema, which is one of those whitewashed villages, sort of nestled up into the hills here. It feels like you're much higher than we are because the mountains just appeared tall because of the erosion and how sort of it feels like you're above tree line and stuff here, but we're actually not that high. I think it's about 3,000 feet in elevation here, like 2,500. Here's one of the viewpoints as we're looking down out over the habitat here. Still have umbrella pines and oaks, but then we get up in this area that's seems almost treeless. the Sierra de Grazalema is actually a series of about 3 different mountain ranges up here. See it feels like you're high, even though it's not. We would on the observation point, and griffon vultures would soar across it at eye level here, and head to the cliffs that were to the right. It was quite a hot afternoon when we were out here, so the birds were hunkered down. We did not see very many birds here on this day, but the lizards were really happy. So we saw lots of these little beautiful specimens here. And then the highlight of this area is we saw the Iberian ibex here, which is the wild goat of the area. We did not get to see a nice big male with the giant horns, but we saw several does and kids here. And they were quite accommodating right off the side of the road. So, I mean, not hard to look at these little guys. And again, we get towards the end of the trip, we didn't get to add a lot of new birds at this point, but we did get a few. And then just to summarize this list, there are actually, I say 211 species on the checklist we were given for the area. There are actually about 206, and then we added 5 birds that weren't on our checklist. So a total of 11. Of those, we saw 164 species. And surprisingly, 88 of those were life birds for me. I think probably the biggest sort of take-home travel message that I would have for this is, even though I've studied California ecology and world ecology and everything, and I've always been told California is a Mediterranean climate. I could say that by rote, yeah, Mediterranean climate. To actually be in the Mediterranean and feel like I'm still in California was a strange feeling. Like everything was somewhat familiar, except that I'd hear birds calling and I couldn't understand them. It's almost like the birds were speaking a different language to me too. So it was this weird familiar yet unfamiliar dichotomy of being there. The other thing that I would say, if anyone does go, birding here, my binoculars are 8x42. The distances at which we bird in our little riparian areas, or even our raptors, they tend to be much closer, and we want to focus up close. The people who bird in Spain have 10 power or 12 power binoculars for the most part, because these birds are at such vast distances or such high altitude. So if you do go, I would recommend bringing higher power binoculars with you. Oh, the other thing I would say about familiarity is same yet not same. So we're here, it's almond orchards everywhere you go. We drove through olive orchards there. So olive trees just by the kilometer after kilometer of olive trees everywhere. So kind of very similar agriculture situation as we experience here. Just acknowledge the tour companies that we used here. We booked the trip through Naturalist Journeys, and then they subcontracted through Birding Tarifa, which was our local Spanish guide who is based right in Cadiz. The whole trip was incredibly well organized. Before we went, they provided us with checklists and field guide recommendations and all kinds of internet links for to get information on the area. Our lodgings were fantastic. The food was incredible. Everything about the journey was very well organized. And our local Spanish guide was just amazing. So big props to these companies. And then in case you're wondering what my 88 life birds were, there's the list of all of my new birds. It was a little surprising to me when I counted my list at the end, because I have been in Europe before. I've been in Greece, I've been in France, I've been in England, I've been in Scandinavia, and I've been in Egypt and South Africa, where some of these birds then come in the winter. But I think the difference is just having a guide. So most of my trips to Europe, my husband and I have just wandered through on our own and done the best we could. So having a guide take us to the places to get all these birds and really try, he worked really hard to get as many birds on the checklist as that. So that was a pleasant surprise. And then I'll just finish with our little good luck charm. Every hotel room we were in had a little Morris gecko in it. That was our natural mosquito control. Um, and that is all I have. So I'm definitely open to any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, Jody. We really appreciate that. It sounds like a fun birding trip. I'm looking for a place to stop recording.